To the United States and the West, nuclear weapons at any level, tactical, strategic, EMPs, whatever, are viewed as something that should only be used as a last resort. And even then, very carefully, on an escalation ladder, as they say. With me, I don't care if you start throwing nukes immediately, responsibly, but immediately. And a case that I've been pushing is the use of an electromagnetic pulse weapon or weapons against Iran. Why are we waiting to get hit?
So that is Jonathan Pollard. He is a convicted American-born traitor who stole classified intelligence, not just information, but intel, a lot of intel from the United States, and handed it over to Israel. And here he is saying, why are we waiting to get hit? So this is not, oh, we just do everything in self-defense. This is, we want to strike them. We want to go on the offense. Why are we waiting to get hit is the question he's asking. And he's saying this because he's asserting essentially that the United States is not doing enough for Israel. He wants more, is what he's saying. And because of it, here he is actually suggesting that Israel should threaten the United States with dropping nukes.
Okay, let me give you an example of that. I was criticized very heavily for opposing the ceasefire, the American imposed ceasefire in Lebanon on us. And I was told by certain people in the government, look, we didn't have choice because we were being threatened with a complete cutoff of arms. So I listened to this, and the individual telling me this said, you don't believe this? Or what? I said, well, I believe that the Biden administration, as I called it, did threaten us. But I said, you're mistaken if you think there's never a choice. There was a choice. He said, well, what? Is it to have our weapons cut off? I said, no, let me bring you back to October 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, when Henry Kissinger instituted an arms embargo against us. He stopped the aerial resupply of our army at that point to extract diplomatic concessions from us. And what happened? What happened was an A-4 Skyhawk was parked at Tel Nof Air Base with some interesting weapons under its wings. And we told the Americans, take your eye in the sky and take a good look at the airplane that's on that runway. And the next day, the airlift started. So the guy that I was talking...
Which airlift?
To Israel. The arms airlift.
So in other words, we threatened their...
We threatened to use unconventional weapons. I'll leave it at that.
You know, it's all kind of wild. All of these AI companies kept telling us, trust us, we respect your privacy. But Facebook said that once too, and now we find out major AI companies are working directly with governments, intelligence people are sitting on boards, and these systems are vacuuming up unbelievable amounts of data. So the real question is, do you actually want every AI conversation tied directly to your identity forever? And that's why this video is sponsored by Venice AI. Think of it like a VPN, but for AI. Venice lets you privately and anonymously access the world's leading AI models, ChatGPT, Cloud, Gemini, DeepSeek, Kimi, all in one place without building a giant personal profile on you. And what's cool is Venice submits requests on your behalf, so your conversations aren't tied to your identity. Your chats are encrypted and stored locally on your device, not sitting on some corporate server waiting to be mined for data. And honestly, I've been using it constantly. You can switch between models, generate images, videos, music, even use Venice Studio as a full creative workspace with the newest tools constantly added in. It was founded by Eric Voorhees, one of the early Bitcoin pioneers and a longtime privacy advocate. So the whole thing is built around protecting users first. Go to my sponsor site, venice.ai/Kim, to access the world's leading AI models privately, all in one place, and use code Kim for 20% off any plan. And don't wait too long, because every day you're feeding the big AI systems, they're building a bigger profile on you.
And so he said, is this what you want us to threaten now? I said, absolutely, except this time I want us to go forward with it if necessary.
unconventional weapons, meaning nuclear bombs. That's what he's talking about here, saying if you don't resume shipments immediately to Israel, we're going nuclear, is what he's talking about. And he's saying that Israel should threaten the United States with that tactic again, except this time he's saying Israel should go through with it. Now, he doesn't actually specify who Israel's planning to bomb with those nukes. We assume he means a Middle Eastern country. That's the assumption there, that when Israel threatened to go nuclear, they meant a Middle Eastern country, but we actually don't know. We actually don't know who they threatened with nukes. Did they threaten the United States with nukes? Do they continue to threaten the United States with nukes? That's the big question. But let's go ahead and back up and talk about who Jonathan Pollard is and how Israel got their nukes to begin with. Okay, so Jonathan Pollard worked as an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Navy in the 1980s, and he had access to highly classified intelligence databases and reports. And what he stole was staggering. We're not talking about 1 or 2 classified documents. Investigators said Pollard was literally walking out of secure facilities carrying suitcases and boxes packed with top secret material. Satellite imagery, signals intelligence, NSA capabilities, Arab military intelligence, Soviet weapons data, reconnaissance methods, classified analytical reports. The volume was so enormous that some officials later said they had never seen anything quite like it from an ally. And that part matters, the ally part, because Americans are used to thinking about spies as Russians or Chinese, but Pollard was spying for a country the American public was told was one of our closest allies, our greatest ally, in fact. And yet, inside the intelligence community, anger toward Pollard was extreme. Then Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger submitted a classified damage assessment so severe that it heavily influenced Pollard receiving a life sentence. That's what he got, a life sentence. Why is he free? That's a good question. He's now sitting pretty in Israel, like a hero. Former CIA Director George Tenet reportedly threatened to resign decades later when politicians discussed pardoning him. So that tells you how serious U.S. intelligence officials believed the damage was. But again, the man's free, sitting in Israel like a hero. Now, officially, Israel did eventually admit that Pollard had been working for them. But what's fascinating is that for years, Israel denied responsibility completely. So at first they claimed, no, he was rogue. We had nothing to do with him. And then they claimed, okay, this is just a misunderstanding. And then eventually they had to just cop up to it. They admitted that he had been part of an official Israeli espionage operation. And here's where the story gets even more interesting. The Israeli handler running Pollard's operation was a man named Rafi Eaton. Now, remember that name, because Rafi Eaton also appears in another extraordinarily controversial and terrible chapter of history, the Apollo affair. And this is where things start connecting in a way that becomes very, very difficult to ignore. So back in the 1960s, the United States had a company called Nukes in Apollo, Pennsylvania. Now, Nukes handled highly enriched uranium, weapons-grade uranium. And during that period, huge quantities of uranium began disappearing from the facility. Not tiny accounting discrepancies. We're talking hundreds of pounds, enough material for multiple nuclear weapons. Now, defenders of the official narrative will say, well, nuclear facilities always lose some material through measurements errors and things like that. And sure, okay, that's true to a point. But the losses at Nukes were so extreme, they triggered investigations by the FBI, the CIA, the Atomic Energy Commission. At that exact same time, Israel was secretly developing nuclear weapons at Dimona. And here's the key. Israeli intelligence-linked officials visited Nukes in Pennsylvania during the period the uranium disappeared, including, once again, Rafi Eaton, the same man who later ran Jonathan Pollard. He was his handler. Now let's pause and just think like a normal human being for a second. You have missing weapons-grade uranium, a secret Israeli nuclear weapons program, Israeli intelligence figures visiting the plant, decades of U.S. counterintelligence concern, and then one of the biggest Israeli spy operations in U.S. history being run by the same exact operative connected to the Nukes story. So at what point are Americans allowed to acknowledge the obvious? Because right now they say, oh, no, it didn't happen. There's never been a declassified memo saying, yes, Israel stole the uranium, but there also doesn't need to be a signed receipt when the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. And by the way, Israel absolutely lied about its nuclear weapons program repeatedly during this period. That's not controversial. Israel concealed the true purpose and scale of the Negev Nuclear Research Center facility from American inspectors for years. Fake walls were constructed. Sections were hidden. Inspections were staged. Even presidents of the United States struggled to get straightforward answers. Our President JFK reportedly pressured Israel aggressively over Dimona because he feared nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. And conveniently, after Kennedy's assassination, pressure on Israel over the nuclear issue just noticeably softened under Lyndon B. Johnson. And eventually, the United States settled into what became known as strategic ambiguity. So everyone knew Israel had nuclear weapons. Israel refused to officially confirm it, and Washington just pretended not to notice. Okay, so now we fast forward to the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Israel suddenly faced a serious military crisis. Egypt and Syria launched coordinated attacks. Israel feared catastrophic defeat in the early days of the war. And that's where the Samson option comes in. So basically, the military intelligence strategy of deploying massive nuclear retaliation as a last resort if the nation faces existential destruction. So the message to Washington was, if Israel feels existentially threatened and the U.S. does not intervene, it's going nuclear. Again, we don't know exactly who they plan to aim those nukes at, but the general thinking is the Samson option is everybody goes down with them. Everybody. So immediately, the Nixon administration resupplied Israel. Now, you could call that deterrence. I call it blackmail. I guess it depends on your perspective. But Pollard bringing this story up now and then openly saying Israel should potentially use nuclear weapons today tells you something important about the mindset we're dealing with. Most people discuss nuclear weapons with horror, but Pollard speaks about them casually, like it's just another tool to get what you want. So Americans should ask themselves a very simple question. Why is a man who betrayed the United States being celebrated as a hero by our greatest ally? When Pollard was eventually released from prison, he moved to Israel. And how was he received? Oh, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu greeted him like a hero. Israeli politicians praised him. Supporters celebrated him publicly, not as an embarrassment, again, as a hero. Not viewed as a criminal who harmed an ally. He's viewed as someone who successfully advanced Israel's interests. And that should matter to Americans, especially now that the same man is publicly discussing threatening the U.S. with nuclear strikes, the Samson option, all over again. Israel's espionage, the theft of uranium, killing our sailors on the USS Liberty, sending letter bombs to Harry Truman, blackmailing Bill Clinton, buying off our elections, bombing countries to drag us into war. These are not isolated incidents. Americans deserve to know the truth about the history of our greatest ally, whether it makes people uncomfortable or not, because history repeats itself. But actually, in the case of Israel, it's not history at all. It's ongoing. The U.S. military and intel agencies did nothing about the Apollo affair. In fact, Israel is now arguably more embedded than ever in both our military and intelligence apparatus. It seems they don't even need to spy to get what they want anymore. And this is leading to serious consequences. We are currently at war with Iran. And if the Israelis have it their way, we're going to be at war with Turkey and Egypt soon as well. Watch this.
I'm not so sure that we will have as easy a time with the Turks as we've had with the Iranians. I've been following Turkish military doctrine, and
the strongest army in the Middle East.
The storm is coming.
Yes, of course. And they're a member of NATO.
And even worse, they're a member of NATO. So I look at Iran as a problem we absolutely have to finish, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Gaza, same thing, and the Hezbollah. Why? Why am I fixated on this now? Because we have to be prepared for the next war, which will be probably against Turkey and Egypt.
Oh, so they're not done. oh, Iran is just the last of the original 7. We're going to move on now to Egypt and Turkey. We're going to continue to wage war. And of course, the United States will be right by Israel's side because we're completely taken over by the Israelis. And he says, oh, the storm is coming to the Middle East. And this is what we have to be prepared to do. And it's bad because Turkey's a NATO ally. I mean, this is who we're dealing with. This is not an ally of the United States. This is a country with its own interests. And they've taken over the United States, and Americans need to wake up to this, that they have fully embedded themselves into our military and intelligence apparatus. And no one has done anything about it. So it's only gotten worse. Now, I want to read to you this letter that was sent by Harry Truman, the president, and he writes this August 23rd of 1947. He writes this to Roosevelt, and he says, my dear Mrs. Roosevelt, I read your telegram with regard to the Jews with a lot of interest. This situation is most embarrassing. One all the way around has been most difficult to approach. I hope it will work out. I understand that these ships were loaded and started to Palestine with American funds and American backing. They were loaded knowing they were trying to do an illegal act. The action of some of our United States Zionists will eventually prejudice everyone against what they're trying to get done. I fear very much that the Jews are like all underdogs. When they get on top, they're just as intolerant and as cruel as the people were to them when they were underneath. I regret this situation very much because my sympathy has always been on their side. Sincerely yours, Harry Truman. And that's important. That's an important point, that the underdog, just like anybody else, this is not unique to Jews. This is not unique to Israelis or unique to Zionists. This is just human nature. And we see it all the time. That when the underdog finally gets on top, a lot of times they're just as brutal and they're just as intolerant and they're just as hateful as the people were to them. We see this constantly with children who were abused. And when the abuser's caught, it turns out the abuser was once abused themselves. And they grew up to become the very thing they hated. And that's what I saw myself when I went to Palestine back in 2019. I walked away from there seeing everything I'd read in the history books about World War II and the Nazis. I watched the Jews become the Nazis in Israel, and I could not believe my eyes. And it was very clear to me that the abused had become the abuser, and the attacked had become the attacker. And that is what's happened now. And again, it is not unique to this one group of people. Those who are being attacked today could also rise up to be just as cruel, just as hateful, just as intolerant. And it's important that we recognize this pattern and we work to stop it the next time around. What we didn't do, which we should start doing now, is we didn't put any limits on the Jewish people. After the Holocaust, we felt an enormous amount of sadness and empathy and guilt and remorse that essentially everybody just said, anything you want, you can have. We will turn a blind eye. You want it? Go ahead. You want this land that already has people on it? Fine. Anything for you, because we just feel so awful. And we allowed, basically, this to run away in a way that has reached epic proportions today of genocide and talking about nuclear bombs and Samson options. That's where we're at today. This has escalated far beyond the death and the murder and the genocide of the Palestinians, which is bad enough as it is. This is now escalated to, now we're going to go after everybody, because this is like the spoiled child that you just never put any rules or regulations on because you just felt so guilty about the damn divorce. And that's what's gone on here with the Jewish people, which have then, many of them have become the Israeli people, and many of them are still Americans, still championing all of this on. I can name off several off the top of my head. Jonathan Pollard being one of them, American-born, total traitor to the country. So we have to remember that the underdog can always rise up and end up becoming the very thing, just as intolerant, just as cruel, just as scary. And it is up to us as the world, if we have compassion, if we have love, if we have tolerance, we need to then turn around and say, no, we need rules, we need regulations, we need distance, we need limit setting is what we need. And our country has failed to do that entirely. And now here we are, I fear, totally overtaken and infiltrated by a group of people who only have war on their brain. And it's up to the American people to recognize this and somehow, some way, put a stop to it. Thanks for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, for free at KimIversonShow.com. See you there.